Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining the class tonight. I hope your week has been good. I apologize for the delay in starting. I was just trying to wait for a few more people to join us. But I think we can start now. And as usual, I'm recording the session. So if anybody joins us as we go along, they can always go back and watch the recorded session. So we're just going to go straight into today's class. Last week, we started with information security, and I tried to explain the concept of information security to you guys. I tried to explain it from setting security goals in terms of security objectives. I talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability being security goals. So those are the goals that those are the objectives you're trying to meet, and then by you trying to do that, then you'll be ensuring the security of the organization. And then we moved on to talk about ISMS, which is Information Security Management System. And then we talked about a few other bits as well. So we're going to be moving forward today. But I thought I should start today with definition of few terms, because we're going to talk more between today and tomorrow. We're going to be referring more to the ISO 27001 framework. And there are some terminologies that was used in that framework that you need to know about. So we're going to be talking about a few of those terminologies. So our course outline remains the same. We started with information security management, and I said we're going to be concentrating on ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. I'm sure you know what ISO stands for now, because I showed you short video clips last week. So I'm sure you know what it stands for. That's what we're still going to be. We're still on information security management between today and tomorrow. Hopefully, if we can finish that bit, and then we can move straight into risk management next weekend. But I believe even by the end of tomorrow, we're going to touch a bit of. By the end of tomorrow, we're going to touch a bit about risk management, but we're still going to go into it fully by next week. So today we're continuing from where we stopped last week, but we're going to start with definition of few terms. And so the agenda for today is governance, risk, and compliance. That's some of the terms that we need to define. We need to understand what governance is, what risk is, and what compliance is. And then we need to understand what policies, guidance, procedures, and standards. The truth is, with an information security management system, the element of an ISMS is policies, guidance, procedures, and standards. You need to understand what these terms meant, because you could be asking an interview, what's the difference between a policy and a guidance, or a policy and a procedure, or a policy and a standard. So you need to understand what these terms meant. So I'm going to be explaining these terms, and I'll be giving you examples. We're going to continue from where we stopped last week in terms of our information security management system, and I'll be linking that up with ISO 27001, and then I'll be explaining what the PDCA cycle is. So this is the objective for today's class. Hopefully, at the end of this class, we have a clear understanding of how to implement ISO 27001, and then you'll be able to tell the difference between policies, guidance, procedures, and standards. So we start with GRC. GRC there means governance, risk, and compliance. GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. With governance, governance is the hand of management. The function is owned by senior management. The senior management sets the company objectives and expects the functional managers to work towards the realization of these objectives. Now, the senior management, they are the one that sets the strategy of the business. They set the objectives of the business. They set the direction of the business. So once they set that, and then they will expect the middle management team. We have the senior management, and then we have the operational managers in the middle. So they expect them to implement those objectives. I'm going to be showing you a diagram very shortly, maybe in the next slide. You see how these things follow each other. So that's what governance is. It's the hand of management. So if you look at organizations that has maybe 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 employees, and they only have one CEO, and these organizations have branches around the world, and you're wondering how are they managing these people? What the tool they use is governance. That's the hand of management. That's what they use in managing the whole business. And that's from that governance, that's where the policies, the guidelines, the procedures, that's where it's going to come from. So everybody within the organization, they need to comply with those policies. I'm sure in your organization where you work right now, if you're working, there are policies in your organizations. You know, when you start work, they will tell you, oh, you need to go on the intranet and read those policies, and then maybe you need to sign, or you just need to acknowledge that, oh, I have read it, you know. So those policies, they are coming from the senior management. That's what they use in governing each of these organizations. Risk there, the risk being referred to here is a bit different from the risk we're going to talk about later on tonight. Anyone who owns a system needs to be aware of the risk. Senior management needs to identify the risk facing the business and make strategic decisions by setting objectives that will keep the business afloat and competitive. A typical example is if you look at the big four supermarkets here in the UK, say if Tesco's cut the pump price of petrol, if they cut the pump price, maybe they reduce it by 1 penny or whatever. The next thing you see is Asda is going to reduce theirs as well. Morrison too is going to respond. It's not that they planned it, but you know they are being mindful of their competitors on the market. So whenever there is a slight change, the senior executives, senior managers, they need to respond. So that's a risk. That's a risk to their business. So in order for them to remain competitive in the market, they will have to make a strategic decision, maybe to reduce their price or to roll out a new product. They just find a way of wooing their consumers so that they will not lose their market shares. So in order to keep the business afloat, so that senior management, they need to make strategic decisions. Compliance. Compliance is the law and regulations that the business needs to comply with. It is the laws governing an organization. You have to be conversant with financial regulation if you're looking to set up a business in the financial industry. The truth is we have this FCA. FCA is the main regulator that regulates the financial industry. So you're going to be setting up if you're going to be setting up a business in that space, then you have to be mindful of the regulations that are coming from the FCA. So that's what compliance is all about. So if you're working in the educational sector, you're working in the health sector, there will always be a regulation that regulates that business. So that's what that business needs to comply with. So depending on where you find yourself working right now, there will always be a regulation that regulates that business or that regulates that sector. So you need to be aware of that regulation, and you need to make sure that the business, the company you're working for, is complying with the law. So that's GRC in a nutshell. Of course, we're going to be talking more of these terms. I'm just trying to define them now, just to, you know, give you an understanding of what this terminology is, because as we go on, we're going to start using the word governance, we're going to use risk, and we're also going to use compliance. So this is how it stands. If you look at this diagram, you have the directives coming from the board and directors, the board of directors and senior executives sitting at the top. And then you have the middle management, the senior and middle management sitting in the middle. And then you have the lower management and the operational staff. So the directives comes from them. That's where the governance is coming from. The board of directors, they own the governance. That is what they use in governing the organization. That is what they use in directing the organizations. So out of those directives, it's going to come policies. It's going to come policies, and from those policies, standards are going to come out of it. So the board could decide and say, you know what, we don't want anybody to go on social media. We don't want anybody to use their assets to visit social media, you know, to go to social media during working hours. They don't want anybody to start visiting Facebook or Twitter or whatever using their company machines. So that's the high level. So there could be a policy, like we have acceptable use policy. I'm sure if you're working, you will have seen an acceptable use policy. So that's a policy. That policy is coming from the board of directors. So with that policy, they will pass it on to the senior management. The board will sign that policy. So based on that policy, the IT guys, they will implement it. Based on that policy, they will formulate a standard. They will implement that policy. If, for instance, they said they don't want anybody to go to Facebook during working hours. So that is why sometimes if you try to go to Facebook at work, it's going to tell you you are not allowed to visit this website. So based on that policy, the IT guys, they will configure their firewalls to make sure they block that website. So they are not just doing, the IT guys are not just doing what they like. They are acting based on what is coming from the senior management, based on the policies. So if the policy says you are not allowed to go to Facebook during working hours, so with that policy, you have seen that policy, you read that policy, but you might still want to go to Facebook anyway, even though the policy says you are not allowed to go to Facebook during working hours. But if you try to go to Facebook, you just see that you can't get through to Facebook. What that means, the IT guys, they have filtered away that they have set up their filter such that if you try to visit that website, you will not be able to visit the website. So that's how they govern the organization. So from there, from those standards, it goes straight to procedures. Procedure is we're going to see a definition of procedure very shortly. It's like a step by step. It's like a cookbook. Procedure is like a cookbook, such that if one person does one thing and the other person does the same thing, they are both going to arrive at the same destination. They are going to get the same answer. So it's like a standardized way of doing things. That's the procedure there. So the board sits at the very top. That's they direct. From the very top, they direct using policies, guidelines, standards, and procedures. And then the senior and the middle management, they sit here. And then we have the lower management and the operational staff. So these are the guys that execute. So whatever is coming from the board and the director, from the board of directors and the executives, this is where it's going to get executed. This is where you have the normal staff of the company, the day-to-day staff, the HR guys, the sales guy, the IT guys. This is where they are. So this is where they follow procedures. So this procedure is coming from policies and standard, and this policies and standard is coming from directives. So whatever is going on at the lowest level here is as a result of what has been decided at the board. It's as a result of what has been decided at the board. So what they decide here, that goes into policies. They sign the policy, and then the senior and middle management guys, they make sure that those policies are being complied with. And then at the execution level, the day-to-day staff, the people in the employee of the organization, they execute it. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle. So this is where the direction is coming from, and then they control. They monitor, because these policies that this board of directors and executives, these policies that comes from the board, they make sure there's a way they measure the effectiveness. That's what we call the measuring the effectiveness of the ISMS. So you want to see if this policy, if people are complying with it. So that's where the control comes in there. So understanding policies, standards, procedures, and guidance. Understanding policies, standard, procedures, and guidance. A policy is an executive mandate. It's very, very important for you to understand these terminologies, because by the time we go into ISO 27001, we're going to be mentioning policy. So a policy is an executive mandate to identify a topic containing particular risks to avoid or prevent. It is always high level. It is never detailed. It is always high level. It is never detailed. For instance, I just used the example I just used when I said if the board said they don't want anybody to visit social media, they don't want anybody to use their assets, to visit Facebook during working hours. So that's why you have the acceptable use. There's a policy called acceptable use policy. We're going to look into all of those policies in ISO 27001. So they'll just write a single. It's always high level. I'm sure you have seen one before, because when you start working in a new organization, they will tell you, oh, you go to our intranet and read our policies. So you see the acceptable use policy, the password policy, the HR policy, the disciplinary policy. There's so many policies out there. So, and the characteristics is they are written in clear, concise, and simple language. So policy statements address what is the rule rather than how to implement the rule. What is the rule rather than how to implement the rule? The rule says you are not allowed to visit social media during working hours. You are not allowed to use the company assets to go to Facebook during working hours. That's the rule. But you will never see in that policy how that rule will be implemented. So that's why a policy will always be high level. So in that policy, they won't write it there. This is how we're going to implement this policy. It will just state it there. It could be, sometimes it's just 4, 5, 6 lines. saying acceptable use policy, you are not allowed to go to social media during working hours. So they won't tell you, the policy will not say this is how it's going to be implemented. So it's simply high level, but the implementation is now down to the IT guys. How it will be implemented is down to the IT guys. So the IT guys have seen the policy. They know the policy says you are not allowed to go to social media during working hours. So they will take that away, and then they will go and configure their own systems. Their servers, they will configure their own systems such that even if you try even if you try to disobey, if you try to go through the back and go to social media, you will still not be able to get to that website. So you remember we talked about last week, we mentioned administrative controls, and we talked about technical controls, and we said part of administrative control is policy. It's an administrative control. When you write policies and you guidelines, procedures, those are all administrative controls. But when it comes to technical controls, that's when maybe like configuring the firewall, configuring the server. When you are disabling ports on the server, to make sure that people are not going to websites that they're not allowed to go to. So that's a technical control. So, and the policy statements are readily available to staff, usually published on the company intranet. Every organization, they have their own policy statement, and they are readily available. So when you join an organization, I'm sure you can attest to this. Your first 2-3 days, you have quite a number of policies which you have to read. And then once you read those policies, you acknowledge that you have read them. And then, maybe the information security manager will take note and say, okay, that fellow has read the policy. And if you haven't done yours, there's a way the system is going to flag it and say this person has not read the company policy. So the company policy, it's about the culture. You can see the culture of the organization. You can see the do's and the don'ts. And remember, like I said in the previous slide, the policy is coming directly from the board of directors, the people that are governing the organization. So the policy is one of the tools they use in governing the organization. So that is why if you go to any branch, of an office, maybe a bank, if you go to a bank in Scotland, or you go to the same branch somewhere in Wales, you go to the same branch somewhere, and anywhere, any of their branches, you could see that the way, the processes and procedures of the bank is going to be the same. It's going to be the same. So that tells you it's the same policy that is operational in all their branches. So no matter how even if there are 25,000 employees, that policy will apply to them. That policy will have been signed by the board. So that policy is the rule. That's the rule of the organization. And when they need to change anything, if they need to change their culture, if they need to change anything, they will just simply change the policy. And once they change the policy, you will just get an email to say, oh, you have a new policy that you have to read. And then once you go in there, you read the policy. Okay, this is what the management wants. So that's why you will see all of them behaving the same way. But having said that, that's just an administrative control. So to back up that policy, the IT guys will implement. What they're going to be doing is that they will implement, based on what the policy is saying. Sometimes you have password policy. Maybe the policy says your password must be like 10 characters and you must use 2 or 3 special characters. That's what the policy says. So even if they tell you that's what the policy is, some people will still want to, renew. Maybe they want to change their password. They want to use 5 characters. They don't want to use 10 characters, even though the policy says you have to use 10 characters. So you might decide to say, I don't want to use 10 characters. I want to use 5 characters. But you will observe that the system will not accept it. Even if you try to disobey that, even if you try not to follow through with that policy, the system will not accept it. So that tells you that the IT guys, they have also implemented a technical control. So apart from the administrative control, which the policy does, the technical guys will also implement technical control to back up that policy. For your information, if you're going to be working as an information security analyst, as an information security manager, policy is one of those things they need you to write. So I'm going to show you samples of policies. There are so many policies on the internet, and I'm going to show you samples as well, what a policy looks like. But this, what you're seeing right now, is the characteristic of good policy. So get ready, and as part of the project we're going to be doing, because we're going to divide ourselves into two groups. When I get to that point, I will talk more about it. We are also going to be writing policies. So every one of us, we have to roll our sleeves and write policies. perhaps when we finish writing it, then we can exchange ideas, exchange, we're going to have two groups anyway. So when we get there, I will give you more information about that. But that's what a policy is all about. Procedures are cookbooks, recipes providing a workflow of specific tasks necessary to achieve minimum compliance to a standard. Details are written in step-by-step format from the very beginning to the end. Step-by-step implementation of the policy. So I just said, okay, let's say assuming we have a password policy coming from the board of directors, signed by the senior executive, by the CEO, and they said that policy says your password must have at least 10 characters with 2 special characters. That's what the policy says, but that's an administrative control. That doesn't mean everybody will comply. For the fact that the senior executives have signed the policy does not mean everyone will comply. Some people will still not want to comply. But how will they implement? How will they implement that policy? That's where the procedure comes in. That's where the procedure comes in. So the IT guys, the guys that implement the policy, there is a procedure that they have to follow. There is a procedure that they have to follow. So that's why if you have issues at work with your system and you call the help desk, and then they say, okay, this is your ticket number, we are dealing with the issue. Maybe a few hours later, you call the help desk again. They will tell you, oh yeah, this person was the one that picked up this, but I'm the one to finish it for you. What I'm trying to say is whosoever is attending to you from the help desk, they all are going to be following the same procedure. It's the same procedure. So it's not that somebody will be doing one thing and the other person will be doing that thing. No, these procedures is one of the tools that they use in governing the organization. So the procedure is also coming from the policy. The procedure is coming out of the policy. Remember, the policy is coming from the board. It's coming from the chief execs. So out of that policy comes this procedure. So the purpose of a procedure is to maintain the highest possible control over the outcome. Compliance with established procedure is mandatory to ensure consistency and accuracy. So you can't say, oh, I'm not going to follow the procedure. I'm sure where you work right now, where you work on daily basis, there are procedures that you follow. There are things that are rules that you have to follow. So you cannot say, oh, I'm not going to comply. I want to do it in my own way. That's not possible. That means you want them to give you your P45. So compliance with procedure, it is mandatory because they want the highest possible control over the outcome. Guidelines. Now, with guidelines, compliance is not mandatory when it comes to guidelines. They are intended to provide advice pertaining to how organization objectives might be obtained in the absence of a standard. So the purpose is to provide information that will aid in making decisions about intended goals. Guidelines are discretionary because the directions provided are usually incomplete. The user has to adapt or discard portions of the information to fit the intended use. If I go back to the example I've been using, if for instance, you could have password guidelines, you could have guidelines for password. So the guidelines could say, oh, you can use, you're advised to use very, very strong passwords, say 12 characters, and make sure that you use numbers and special character. If it's a guideline, you can decide to ignore it, or you can decide to comply because it's just a guideline. It's just a guideline. It's not a policy. It's not a procedure. So it's a guideline. So it's compliance with guidelines is not mandatory. It's just to guide you. It's just to guide you. So if you say, I don't want to use 12 characters, I want to use 6 characters, the system will still accept it because it's just a guideline. So compliance with guidelines is not mandatory. It's at your own discretion. It's at your own discretion. They're just trying to guide you here. So that's what guidelines is. So please take note of these terminologies: procedures, policies, procedures, guidelines. I'm going to talk about standards very, very shortly. A standard is an agreed way of doing something. I think whilst we were looking at the ISO video last week, when I was showing you about ISO, you saw the primary reason why ISO was formed, International Organization for Standardization, why it was formed. And the main question is, what is the best way of doing this? What is the best way of doing this? And I showed you guys ISO comprised of of about 160 national bodies across the world. In the UK here, we have the BSI, the British Standard of Institution. Here in Britain, we have the BSI. Back home in Nigeria, we have the Standard Organization of Nigeria. So across the world, in America, we have the ANSI. So all of these national bodies, they came together and then they formed the International Organization for Standardization. So experts will come together and decide and ask this simple question: what is the best way of doing this? So in our own space now, what is the best way of implementing information security in an organization? What is the best way of keeping an organization safe? So that's what ISO 27001 is all about, and that's what we're about to learn in this course. So it's an agreed way of doing something. It could be about making a product, managing a process, delivering a service, or supplying materials, e.g. quality management standard ISO 9001, food safety standard, information security management, which we're going to be concentrating on in this course, is a standard that can help you manage the security of all types of information within your organization. Health and safety standards. So these are all standard. So the question is, what is the best way of doing this? So these guys have come together, experts in SMEs, subject matter experts in various fields. They have come together and they have put heads together and they have put pen to paper and they have decided to say, okay, this is the best way of doing this. So that becomes a standard. That becomes a standard. We have what the health and safety standard. Okay, so many standards are out there. No matter which industry you are coming from, no matter what background you are coming from, there will always be a standard for that industry. So in our own instance, the standard we are concentrating on is ISO 27001. It's actually ISO 27000 series because it has a number of standards within the series, but the most common of them is ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. ISO 27001, ISO 27002. I hope you guys have printed the document I sent you. I sent you a document during the week. It's a very, very important document. If you will be able to grasp what this document is all about at the end of this course, if you can grasp it, it will be very, very beneficial for you. Because if you go online, if you go to any job serve, if you go to job site, you go to job serve, and you just type information security management and you just put ISO 27000, just type information security management, it will always come up with ISO 27001. They want people that have the knowledge, that has the knowledge of ISO 27001. They want people that will be able to write policies for them. They want people that will be able to write procedure. They want people that will be able to write guidelines. When we get, I'm going to show you the documentations involved very, very shortly. So that's what ISO 27001 is all about. And I've been saying that this is not IT security. This is information security. It is bigger than IT security. It's not about the technology. It's about the people. It's about the process. And it's about the people, the process, and the technology, all of them together. So it's not just technology alone. It's not just technology alone. So don't say, oh, I'm not coming from an IT background. Will I be able to do this? Yes, you can do it. This is information security. And the standard, the most common standard out there all over the world, is not just in the UK. ISO 27001 is the standard all over the world. It's not just in the UK. So if you know how to implement ISO 27001, if you know how to use this framework, if you have a knowledge of this framework, you can go anywhere and work. You can do it. You can do anything. I mean, you can work as an information security analyst in any country as long as you know about this framework. That is the most common. It is the foundation. There's a lot of stuff going on around the world today in terms of cyber security. People are kind of, so where do we start from? What do we do? The foundation of all the domains in security is ISO 27001. That's the foundation. There are some other standards like PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That's the standard for payment merchants, people that take payment cards, organizations that take payment details from the public. They have a standard that they have to comply with. But that's a different standard. But the foundation is ISO 27001. So if there are other standards that you want to comply with, this is the starting point. For instance, now if a bank is trying to comply with PCI DSS and they are not yet in compliance with ISO 27001, it's going to be a waste of money, it's going to be a waste of resources, and it's going to be a waste of time for them, because this is the foundation. ISO 27001 is the foundation for information security. Is the foundation for cyber any domain, in security. If you have not implemented ISO 27001, how do you want to encrypt? How do you want to control access? You need this. So please, I really want you to pay attention to this. And after the class, you can always go back and watch the recorded video, and then you make notes. Don't think because you're hearing me speaking now, you think, oh, I'm getting it. Until you go back, create time and make notes, write your own notes, write your own definition, go online. Those terminologies we have defined, go on Google, go online, go and check other terminologies, compare and contrast. With that, it's going to sync. Then you get to understand it. So all standards can be grouped into 4 basic categories. Listen to this. I was talking to one of us few just before the class, and she was asking me about what's the relationship between information security and GDPR and the likes, and I was telling her that just follow me. By the time we get to the end of our training, you will have full understanding of all these terminologies. So if you look at regulatory standard, the word regulatory there is coming from regulation. So it could be that it's an act of parliament. Maybe they've passed the law. The word regulatory standard is coming from regulation. If it's a regulation, the Data Protection Act 1998 is a regulation. The GDPR, which we're going to look at the later part of this course, is also a regulation. SOX there stands for Sarbanes-Oxley, which is applicable to the financial industry, is also a regulation. SOX was passed in the US, but it is applicable in all banks all over the world. So it is applicable in all banks all over the world. So when the banks collapsed back in 2008, it was as a result of control failures. It was as a result of failures, but so these failures are what results into regulation. So whenever there is a problem in the industry, in any industry, say okay, for instance now, I'm sure you're aware when this Volkswagen of Germany, when they were discovered that they were manipulating the emission, when they were testing diesel cars, and then they were manipulating the figures, and the government got to find out that what that German car maker was presenting was not correct. Okay, so that would lead them to formulate a regulation. That will lead them to formulate a law and say, look, this is the standard that you guys have to follow in order for this not to happen again. So with a regulatory standard, compliance is mandatory. Any regulation if any standard that is a regulatory standard is always compliance with it is always mandatory. So there's no one, as long as your business is here in this UK, you have to comply with the Data Protection Act 1998. As long as your business is within the European Union, come May 2018, you have to comply with the GDPR, with the General Data Protection Regulation. As long as you are in the financial industry, you have to comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley, which is SOX. Okay, so it's a regulation, and compliance is mandatory. Compliance is mandatory. Look at industry standards. Like I told you, industry standard, I've given an example here, ISO 27001. ISO 27001, it is not a regulatory standard. The fact that you have a business and your business is not complying with ISO 27001, that doesn't mean that the law will come after you. The compliance with that standard is not compulsory, even though it is an industry standard. But compliance is not compulsory. The cars that were being manufactured before year 2000, most of those cars, they never had Bluetooth. But the cars they've been making from 2011 till now, those cars, they have Bluetooth. But you can decide to say, you know what, I want my own car. I don't want Bluetooth in my car. The fact that you don't have Bluetooth in your car does not mean that the law will come after you. That doesn't mean that police will come after you. It is just an industry standard. So the car makers, the car makers, they don't have to comply with it. It is just an industry standard. It is just an industry standard to say, oh, well, this is a class that we belong to. We don't make any car, Bluetooth, parking sensors. It comes as standards with our cars. Car makers can brag about that, but it is not actually compliance with those kind of standard is not mandatory. It is just an industry standard. So take note of these standards. I've said regulatory standard is mandatory. Industry standard is not mandatory. So wherever you're going to find yourself working, whichever industry you find yourself working, it is your responsibility as the information security analyst to sit back, to take a step back and just look at the context of your organization. In this organization that I'm going to be working for, what do they do? What business do they do? What are they selling? What service are they providing? What law is governing them? Is there any regulation that they need to comply with? They will expect you to tell them all of that. And then we have the organizational standard. Organizational standard is just specific to each industry. It's specific to each company, rather. So you will agree with me that the disciplinary procedure in one company could be different from the disciplinary procedure in another company. It's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the same. So the things they accept in one company, they might not accept it in another company. One company might say, "Oh, we allow teleworking here. You can work from home 2 days a week, and then 3 days you can come to the office." But some organizations, you say, no one is allowed to work remotely. You have to come to work every day. That's their own standard. That's their own organizational standard. And then we have personal standard, which are the things, the things that you like, the things that you don't like. You have your own standard. You might see some product and say, no, I don't like that. It's below my standard. So these are the 4 categories of standard. But most importantly is the regulatory standard and the industry standard. The regulatory standard and the industry standard. For instance, now PCI DSS regulation, PCI DSS payment card industry data security standard is also a standard, but it is actually not a regulatory standard. It's actually an industry standard. But what happens is compliance with it is mandatory, but it's not being enforced by the law. The law doesn't enforce it, but because that PCI DSS was formed by the Big Five, the Visa, MasterCard, JD in the US. I think 5 of them, 5 Discovery, 5 of those Big Five. They are the Big Five. That's where PCI DSS came from. So anybody that's going to be doing business with this Big Five, they will expect you to comply with PCI DSS. If you don't comply, they will cut you off. So that means once they cut you off, that means you won't be able to transact business, you won't be able to take payment from your customers, and that means your business might fold. So you will be forced to comply. So that is why most organizations that cannot comply with the standard, they will outsource their payment. So that's why sometimes if you go to a website, maybe you go to a particular website, you like some product, you say, okay, I want this, I want that. The moment you click on checkout, you suddenly find out that you are being directed to another website, maybe WorldPay, PayPal. You are directed to another website. You make payment in that website, and then once the payment is cleared off, and then it brings you back to the website where you were initially, and then you complete your transaction. Reason is because that website that you want to buy, that e-commerce website that you want to buy something from, they cannot comply. They are not in compliance with PCI DSS. So they have outsourced that part of their business. So they know that, look, we can't. The requirement for PCI DSS is too much for us, and it's going to be too costly. So we rather pay PayPal few change and let PayPal take the payment for us. Of course, PayPal complies. WorldPay, they comply with PCI DSS. They take payment from the public, so they comply with those standards. So they rather outsource that part of the business. Okay, so it's an industry standard, but just take note, whichever standard, whatever standard, always ask yourself, this standard that I'm looking at, is it a regulatory standard or is it an industry standard? If it's a regulatory standard, compliance is mandatory, and that's why you see companies running around now trying to make sure that they sort out their GDPR before May 2018, because they know that once that date comes, the law comes into force, and then they know that it's going to cost them. I think it's going to cost them 2% of their turnover, or maybe about 20 million pounds or thereabout. So it comes with a very, very heavy fine, because it's a regulatory standard and compliance is mandatory. So let's go on. Yeah, so before I leave policy, standard, guideline, and procedure, so this is a relationship between policy, policy standards, guidelines, and procedures. policies, provides emphasis, sets direction, signed by recognized management authority. That is very, very key. It's very, very important. Any policy has to be signed by the chief executive. It has to be signed by a member of the board. The person that signs the policy has to be a C-level officer. Otherwise, what that is telling me is that the board is not, they are not backing information security. Maybe their culture is very, very, maybe the culture of that company is very, very bad in terms of information security. But just know that the policy has to be signed by the chief exec. So if you go back to work on Monday, you go and check all the policies, you will see that it has been signed by a member of the board or the chief executive of your organization. Your manager, it will never be your manager signing the policy. You can write the policy, because when you start working, one of the things you're going to be doing for them is to write policies, and that's why we're going to get our hands dirty. We are going to write policies. So you can write the policy, you can write acceptable use policy. That policy you are writing is going to be based on what the board wants. It's going to be a directive from the board. It's going to be a directive, but the board, they can just send you an email to tell you, can you please amend our acceptable use policies? We don't want anybody to go to Facebook during working hours. So that's your job to write a policy. So you will write the policy, but they will own it. Take note of that. You write the policy, you as the information security officer, information security consultant, information security analyst, you could write, or information security manager, you can write the policy, but the senior management owns it. They own it in the sense that they are the one to sign it off. So that's why it is signed by recognized management authority. And the reason why they have to own it is because of the authority, so that anybody within the organization will know that this is a serious business. The chief executive has signed this policy. So compliance with that policy is mandatory. Standards, we've talked about this. I don't want to waste too much time. So at your own time, please, I will advise you go back to the recorded video and try to make notes. Go online, do your research, and write the differences. Back in the days, I've been to interviews and they were asking me, can you tell me the difference between policy, standard, and guidelines? Okay, so please take note of these terminologies. Yeah, information security management systems, organizations of all type and sizes.
Sorry, Daira. I'm just wait to the end.
Okay.
Are the questions waiting to the end?
Okay, I think. Okay, you can go on. Ask your question, please. Who is talking, please?
Now, I was just wondering, the slide before this, up until you got to that slide, I sort of thought I grasped the difference and how they link together, but that diagram, it might just be me, but the diagram is a bit counterintuitive.
Is it
confusing? Yeah, the way I thought they related. So, for instance, like the policy, I was expecting that the standard would feed into the policy or whatever. So, if you're writing a policy, some of the information that you would need would be from your knowledge of the standard. So where that standard is in that diagram, policy feeds into standard, it confused me a bit. So I thought, so maybe I need to go away and take a closer look again. So so policies being informed by your knowledge of standard. Then then the breakdown of the policy, when you then write the lower level details of the policy, you now translate it to guidelines and procedures. Guidelines, like you said, are sort of not mandatory. Procedures but it confused me. Maybe just looking at this diagram, the way I thought it all linked up. So I don't know. So maybe, like you said, we need to go away and see.
Yes, you need to go away and look at it properly. But this policy feeds into this standard. For instance, now, if sometimes when at work, and maybe you try to enter your password, you're trying to log in at work, and then by the time you do it 3, 4, or 5 times, it logs you off. It says, oh, you are not allowed. You have to call the service desk for them to reset your password for you to be able to log on. So all of that was implemented based on the policy of the organization. So their standard is, if you are, for instance, if you are working in maybe you're working in HR, or somebody who is I'm trying to, because there are levels of access. Sometimes it could be that if you enter the wrong password thrice, it locks you out and you won't be able to log in until after 24 hours. Or you have to call the service desk, and then your manager will have to do something. It depends on the sensitivity. In some other instance, if you try to, maybe you enter your password, maybe it could still allow you to enter your password maybe 5 times before it locks you out. Now those are standards, and those are coming from, all of that is coming from the policy which the board has decided. All of that is coming from what the board wants when it comes to password and all those things. So please, just maybe you like I said, go online and do some other checks. Do online and make your notes, compare and contrast. And if you still have further questions, we can still revisit it. But for the sake of our time, let's just go on. But just know that the policy comes first. The policy is the high level. It comes first. The policy comes first, and it's just it's a high level. It's not detailed. It's not a policy will not tell you how it will be implemented. The policy will never tell you the how. The policy will simply state the rule. Will simply set the direction. It will simply set the direction and tells you this is the rule with regards to this issue in this organization. This is the rule, but it won't tell you. The policy will not tell you how it will be implemented. It is when you go lower than that, when you get to the IT guys, that's where the guide and the standards and the procedure begins to come into play. But the policy comes first, and that's why you see policy right at the top here. But like I said, please, Okwe, we can talk about this after the class when you go online and do your research. I'm happy to learn if you find something new.
Okay, so, thank you.
Going forward now, we're going into organizations of all types and sizes. I said that in one way or the other, they collect, process, store, and transmit information. They collect, process, store, and transmit information. Organizations recognize that information and related processes, systems, networks, and people are important assets for achieving organization objectives. So no matter what the objective of the board, when the board sets the objectives, when they decide the direction of the organization, they recognize that the processes, the systems, the networks, the people, they are all important assets. They are all important assets to achieving that objectives. Organizations face a range of risks that may affect the functioning of assets and address their perceived risk exposure by implementing information security controls. All information held and processed by an organization is subject to threats of attack, error, nature, e.g. flood or fire. What this slide is just trying to say is that what I'm trying to the point I'm trying to buttress here is the collect, process, store, and transmit information. Every other thing that is happening here is because of this point number A. Because you remember, whilst we were doing when I was doing the taster class for you guys, I showed you guys why data is so important to every organization. So no matter what industry you are, you always even if it's just the data of your employees, even if it's just your HR data, at least you send some information to HR to HM revenue. So you still collect, you process, and you store and you transmit information. So based on that, organizations are very, very wary of risk, because if anything should go wrong in any of these points number A here, that is going to affect the objectives of the organization. So the term information security is generally based on information being considered as an asset which has a value requiring appropriate protection, for example, against the loss of availability, confidentiality, and integrity. I'm sure you know about those three terms now, the three security goals, the three triads. So it's all about information security of this asset. So they regard this asset. Even you that is working in that organization, you are an asset to them, because they know that without you, they cannot achieve their organization's objectives. So information security encompasses all of this together. Yes, I think it's time for me to show you this. I've put this together because one thing I've said to you, ISO 27001 implementation is all about policies, guidelines, procedures. So that means when we get to that point now, when I begin to talk you through the framework, when we start looking at the structure of that framework itself, You are going to see all the documents that you need, the things that you need to do in order for an organization to comply. By the way, when we get, I think there's a slide that talks about the benefits. There's a slide that talks about the benefits of ISO 27001. So I'll be showing you that. But what you're seeing here is this is a disaster charity. This organization does not exist. It's just fiction. But I just thought it's the best way we can, try to. What we're going to try and do is we're going to divide ourselves into two groups. So once we divide ourselves into two groups, so we're going to attempt to look at this organization, and we're going to do a risk assessment of this organization. So the objective is we want this organization to comply with we want them to get certified. We want them to get certified. By the way, by the time, if you're working on an ISO 27001 project, by the time you have finished the implementation, so when you finish implementing an ISMS, Information Security Management System, so once you finish with that system, the next thing that will happen is you will now go and call you go and you go the BSI, you go and call them your BSI, you send to BSI. So somebody is going to come into your organization who will come and assess. We call them an assessor. So an independent assessor will come into that organization. So once they come into the organization, the assessor will ask you, so can you show me your acceptable use policy? Oh, that's our policy. Can you show me your password policy? Oh, that's our password policy. What procedure? Can you show me your guidelines? So what are you, how do you do this? How do you do that? So and then you'll be showing them. So once the assessor is satisfied, so if the assessor is satisfied with the job you have done, they will now issue them with ISO 27001 certificates. Companies are always they're always very, 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 very quick to blow their trumpet whenever they get this certificate. And they're not just going to get it. One thing about information security is not something that they will get and then, oh, I now have the certificate, so bye-bye, see you, bye-bye, it's once and for all. No, it's not once in a lifetime. The certificate is being renewed every 3 years. And one thing is, even after you have implemented an ISMS for an organization, they still need you to maintain. They need you to maintain it. They need you to maintain it because a core part of this implementation you're going to be doing is the risk management. A core part. In fact, that's the big chunk of ISMS implementation. It is all about managing risk to the organization. It's all about managing risk. So looking at this charity organization, you know what charity organization does. So this lady here, she's on the street. She's got a paper. She's got a folder. And then she's on the street, she's going from house to house, going from cars to cars, and she's obtaining details. And this guy here in the car, this person gave this lady his name, his address. This person is giving her personal identifiable information. This person is giving away his personal data. This person wants to support this charity. And then once this lady finishes her shift, and then that comes into this paper records here. So you can see this pile of paper records. So everything here, so maybe she's got a mate somewhere around her. So all of that will come in here. So somebody within that organization is going to enter all this information into their system. So we're looking at it. Let's say it's a big charity organization, but we're just looking at their customer service operations. So this is their customer service operations. So once they collect the record, you collect information on the street. It comes in here as paper records, and these guys here, these are the staff. These guys here, they are seated in the office. So they come here, they enter, they open a file, they put all of this information, they put it into their system, and once they are done with this paper file, they send them to archives. Bear in mind, this guy that gave away his personal data on the street is not aware of what these guys are doing here. And these are some of the things we're going to be talking about when we get to the GDPR section. You're going to see how GDPR comes into play here. So this guy is giving away personal data. These guys here, they store it here in a paper records, and then these guys, they are processing it. Okay, and then some other people, they pick up their landline and then they call their receptionist. They call their receptionist and to say, you know what, I want to support this charity. I learned you guys, you support disasters around the world. I want to support this charity. So this lady here, we take details. This guy here, I'm sure you have seen text messages. You have seen adverts that says text 4403 to so number to donate £10. You know all those adverts on the TV. Text, for instance, water aid. We say text water to 4405 to donate £5. So if you text the word water to that number, they will automatically take £5 away. They will charge you £5. So people are calling. But some people maybe on the internet, some people through search engine, some on Facebook, some go to the company Facebook page. From there, they interact them, they give them details from there. So these people here, they are collecting information from all over the place. They are collecting information, and the information they are collecting, the data they are collecting, they are personal data. Their personal data. And then this is their web server. This web server is where their application is being hosted. Every time you go to a website, you go to www. or you go to bbc.co.uk, what happens is your computer is communicating with another computer called a server. They call it a server. The simplest definition of a server is a computer that serves other computers. A computer that serves other computers. That's a server. So don't try to think it's a huge technical thing when you hear the word server. It's just another computer somewhere that is serving other computers. So this is a computer here. You could have multitudes of computers trying to communicate, trying to visit the website of this organization. That website is hosted here. Is sitting here in this server. So this person that sat down in his living room and he just went into disastercharity.org and he sees their website. Oh, this is their website. And then he sees the button that says donate. He clicks on it. Okay, enter your name, your email address, your date of birth, your credit card details. That person puts all of that information here, and that this person is interacting with an application sitting here, and this is the database at the back end of this server. So this server is hosting the application, but all the information that is coming from this guy is actually being stored here. This is the database. Okay, this is the database here. So this guy either on Facebook or through search engine or whatever, they are communicating with the web server, and all the information they are putting in here is being saved here in the database. And this is the database here. So the guys in the office, they have access to this database. Okay, so they pull the information that this guy has inputted from his computer is sitting here right now. So these guys here, they have access to this server. So they pull that information, they process it, and then they send it again to another database here. So this is another database. So this database is where the processed data sits. So perhaps this one here is where the unprocessed data, because this is the raw data coming from the public, it hasn't been processed. But now that it has been processed, perhaps it will now be sitting here. So they store that data here. So once they store it here, now they have another guy. This is another guy. Perhaps this is a third party. This guy doesn't work for Disaster Charity. This is a supplier. This is like a vendor to them. This is a third party that works with this charity organization. So perhaps this is a third party that will pick up the names and email address and then send letters to all the people that are signed up to support this charity organization. Okay, so I'm just trying to visualize a typical organization that is not too big that we can. So our assignment when we get to that point is for us, we're going to do a risk assessment. So we're going to try and see what we can do for this organization. So assuming you have been called upon, you have been called in, you are the consultant, you say, okay, you know what, we understand you're an information security professional, so we need you to come into our organization. We understand GDPR is coming, and as a matter of fact, we want to comply with ISO 27001. So we need you to come and help us implement it. Okay, so I've taken my time. So don't worry, we're gonna do it together. So you're not gonna be left alone. So we're gonna divide ourselves into two groups. So what we're gonna be doing here is exactly what you need to do when you go out there to start working in real life. So that's why I've tried to paint a picture to make it as as real as possible. So now you have an organization, you have a third party here, and you can see all of this. And remember, anything of value to an organization is, you can see there are so many assets here. This is an asset, this is an asset, this is an asset, this is an asset. For those of us that are not technical, don't but this is a firewall. A firewall is just a device that helps you to filter. You want to block unwanted traffic. You want to block unwanted traffic. You don't want people to gain, to gain access to a particular place, you use a firewall. The IT guys, they know how to configure the firewall such that it will block some traffic, it will allow some traffic, it will not allow some other traffic. So at work, when you're trying to go to Facebook.com, you can see it's not going through. You can't see that website. It's because the firewall has been configured to block that particular traffic. So that's where the technical guys do their technical stuff. Okay, so this firewall is there to protect this database. Okay, and this firewall is also there to protect all these assets here. So all of these assets, we're going to consider them. We're going to look at the potential risk to these assets, and we're going to look at the controls that needs to be implemented. We're going to look at controls, because that's what they want you to come and do. So if you go to the organization, one of your first assignments, what you need to do by the time we get there now is for you to understand the context of the organization. I was telling you the other time that you could be working in the health sector, you could be working in the education sector, you could be working in the manufacturing sector. It depends. That's the context of the organization. This organization is a charity organization. So you need to look at the standards. Now you know that, oh, this is a charity organization. Is there any regulatory standard that they need to comply with? Is there any industry standard that they want to comply with? So these are all the things they are going to be considering. They are going to look at all their assets. So all these assets, are there controls on these assets? You are collecting personal data. You have paper records. You are sending them to archives. Are there controls? Okay, this data you're processing, is this person aware? For how long are you going to keep this record? Are you going to keep this record forever and ever? So when we get there, by the time we get to the Data Protection Act and the GDPR, we're going to talk more on this, because all of that is on compliance side. But like I told the lady I was talking to, one of us spoke to me earlier on, and I was telling her that you need to have an understanding of information security in order for you to function well in GDPR. Okay, because if I go straight into GDPR and I didn't take my time to explain the basics, the basic terminologies, the basics of information security, the foundation of information security. So how do you want to do risk assessment when you get to GDPR? How do you want to do it? How do you want to do GDPR security? Because when it comes to GDPR, it's all about data subject and their data. It's all about you and I and our personal data. It's all about protecting the personal data of data subject. How do you want to protect it? How would you know the controls to use? Okay, so that's why we will go through this framework, ISO 27001. We're going to look at all the controls in therein. We're going to look at all the clauses and how they apply. So please just bear in mind, we're not going to start now. I believe by the time we get to the end of our course, you will have a better understanding of all these things I'm saying. But just know that get prepared, get yourself prepared. If you want to be a group leader, please let me know. Otherwise, I will just choose. But just know that we're going to divide ourselves into two. And then I believe if we can do it properly, if we can do it appropriately, we can, each group will need to present their own, their own report. So when you finish doing yours, each group will choose, and then you can do a presentation and we'll see what you've done. So just to give you an overview, just to give you an information on what is coming in the next few weeks. So we go straight into the framework now. So what is ISO 27001? Information. So at this point in time, if you have your ISO 27001, if you have it printed, if you have printed it, you can bring it out. So because I'll start referring to it. If you don't have a copy of this document, just let me know. I'm happy to give you a copy. I've just saved you £100 by giving you a copy for your information. Okay. So I've said you guys should print it out because it's easier for me to refer to it. If I can tell you, okay, go to page this or go to page that. Oh, Ade, you don't have a copy. Okay, don't worry. I'll sort it. I'll sort it. So please, you can bring it. We can bring it out because we're just about going into it very, very shortly. So ISO 27001 is an internationally recognized standard that specifies the requirement for establishing, implementing, and maintaining an information security management system. So, of course, we've talked about that. I've talked about that standard quite a number of times, so I'm sure you understand what that means. Now, the standard consists of two parts. There are two parts in this standard. We have the clauses, we have the main part, which is the clauses, and then we have the Annex A. So if you look at, if you open to page If you open to page 10, you can see reference control objectives. Reference control objectives and controls. So if you open to page 10, you will see it there. So that's Annex A. We call it Annex A. And this it comprises, it's a catalog of 114 controls grouped in 14 sections. So what I'm going to do is I won't be able to go through all of those 114 controls. Time will not permit me to do that. But I will go through the sections. So at least you will have an idea of what each section is all about. You will have an idea. So it's a catalog of controls. It's a catalog of controls. Remember, I'm sure you remember that I said we could have we have two types of controls. It could be administrative, it could be technical. So if you will take your time and look at those controls, you will see that they are just they can be grouped under those two categories, either administrative or technical control. If you look at page 10, A.5.1.1, it says policies for information security, and it says control. A set of policies for information security shall be defined, approved by management, published and communicated to employees and relevant external parties. So that's a control there. That's an administrative control. That's an administrative control. So you're not going to be bringing something out of the blues. So by the time you are implementing for your client, it's not that you are forming something. So you let them know that, look, this is the framework that I'm going to be using for you guys. So everything you need is here. You just need to familiarize yourself with these controls and how they work together. So we're still looking at the structure. We're going to start from the we're not going into the controls today, actually. So today, if I can get to start to talk about the clauses starting from page 1, the clauses. That's where we're going to start from page 1. I believe by the end of tomorrow we'll be able to finish that. Hopefully if we can tomorrow we might stay a bit longer if you guys don't mind, because I want us to finish this stuff tomorrow, so that next week, Friday and Saturday, we go straight into risk management, and if possible on Saturday we can start auditing. So for this week, I want us to concentrate on this framework. So it consists of two parts, which you have the clauses, which is the main part, 0 to 10. We have the clauses, and then we have Annex A, and the Annex A comprises of 114 controls. No employer, nobody will expect you to memorize controls. You are not expected to memorize controls. Don't attempt to memorize controls. You don't have to. You will always, as a matter of fact, wherever you're going to be working, they will give you a copy. You can demand. So can I have a copy of your ISO 27001? You know, they will give you a copy. Okay, so there will always be a copy, so which you need to refer to. So based on your risk assessment, you can you can look at all the controls and say, okay, this applies to us, this applies to us, this doesn't apply to us, this doesn't apply to us, oh, that applies to us. Okay, so there are controls. Okay, for instance, now if you look at the diagram I showed you guys, that lady that was on the street with a file, you know, she's obtaining personal data from the street. She's writing on a paper record. When you get to a control that says password policy, that is not applicable to that lady on the street, because she doesn't use anything. There's nothing like password. She's taking the details on a piece of paper. Okay, so that means it is not applicable to her. So it's not that you have to use all the controls there. So there are some controls that will not be applicable to your organization. So that's why we get to a point that's what we call the statement of applicability, where you will state all the controls that are applicable to your client. Like that diagram I showed you, by the time you do your risk assessment, you'll be able to identify all the controls that are applicable to that charity organization. So it doesn't mean you have to know all the controls. It doesn't mean for every time you do a risk assessment, for every time you want to implement, you're part of an ISO 27001 implementation project, then you have to implement all the 114 controls. No, it's not every time. It depends on the context of the organization, and it depends on the outcome of your risk assessment. So these are the two parts that makes ISO 27001. So as previously defined, ISMS is a systematic, I'm sure you know what ISMS stands for now. It's a systematic approach for managing and protecting a company's information. It consists of policies, procedures, guidance, as well as setting the information security rules. I'm sure you now appreciate the reason why I was hammering on policies, procedures, and guidance when we started. That was why I was trying to explain these terminologies to you guys, because that is the main core, that is the core part, that's the main element of an ISMS. That's the main body. So because as a result of your risk assessment, you're going to come up with policies, you're going to come up with procedures and guidance, as well as setting information security rules. So the systematic approach for managing it and protecting information, a company's information, is what information security management is all about. The kind of administrative and technical controls that will be implemented will depend on the requirement of the interested parties or the results of risk assessment. When we get there, when I start to explain to you how to implement ISMS, I'm going to talk more about interested parties, because when you're looking at the context of the organization, there could be some interested parties. If, for instance, now you are working for an organization, and that organization is a supplier to Barclays. That organization is a supplier to a multinational. Okay, so Barclays will have some specific requirement. They will have some demands, and they will say, look, if you want to continue to be our supplier, these are the things you must do. These are the conditions. These are the things you have to do. So you, as a consultant working for that organization, you need to look at those things and say, okay, what does this your big customer or whatever, what exactly do they want? Because you are working for maybe you are working for a small and enterprise, for a small and medium enterprise, and then this SME is a supplier to a multinational like Barclays. So you have to put Barclays interest. You have to put their interest into, you have to consider their interest. So that's what the interested party stands for. Or the result of risk assessment. Like I said, the core part, the main work in implementing ISMS is risk assessment, risk management. So the result of that risk assessment is what will determine the kind of controls that you need to implement. Okay, for each risk that needs to be treated, a combination of different controls will be implemented. So for each risk that needs to be treated, a combination of different controls. I'm going to tell you what risk treatment is all about. Okay, risk treatment: you could accept a risk, you could transfer a risk, you could share a risk, you could avoid a risk. When we get there, I will explain all these terms. You will know what it means to treat a risk. Okay, and there's what we call defense in depth. There's what we call defense in depth. So the fact that you have identified the risk does not mean once you apply a control, that's the end. Oh well, I identified the risk, and then there's no need. That I think we've implemented a control, and then that's it. Maybe you got to find out that, like that firewall I was showing you, you got to find out that, well, that firewall has a default configuration. There's no restriction on the firewall. Everybody within that charity organization, they can go to Facebook, they can go to any website they want, they can do whatever they like during working hours. That's what you find out. And then so you said, look, why are you allowing your staff to go on Facebook during working hours? That could somebody can download something from Facebook, and that could introduce virus into your environment. And they say, well, we have not thought it that way. And then you said, okay, and then they're asking you, so what controls can we put in place to prevent that? So you can't just say, well, I'm going to write a policy that says nobody should go to Facebook during working hours. And once they write that policy, that's an administrative control, and then that's it. That's not possible. You deceive yourself. So for each risk you identify, you need a combination of different controls. So even though you have written a policy that says you are not allowed to go to Facebook during working hours, you now need, that's one control. There has to be another control. Minimum, there has to be one other control that will support that policy. So it could be a case of, can you pass that policy to the IT team so that they can configure their firewall to block that traffic? So if somebody is trying to visit facebook.com, that traffic will be blocked. So that's another control over there. So that means that's defense in depth. Remember back home in Africa, when we want to go to bed at night, you have a fence, you have a gate. After the gate, which the gate is locked with one giant padlock, and then just before you get to the main door, there's another iron door. Okay, after that iron door, there's another door again, That's defense in depth. So in terms of physical security, that's defense in depth. You have the iron gate, you have the iron door, and then you have this massive main door. And then the door that leads to your room, you lock it again. So you can see different controls. That's an example of defense in depth. So these are different controls. All you're trying to guide against is you don't want an unauthorized person to gain access to your house. So that's why you have all those gates, all those things, back at home, in Africa. So that's an example. That's a typical example of defense in depth. In the same way, when it comes to protecting information, we also have defense. We also have defense in depth. So you protect the information and you ask yourself, so in case somebody breaks into this, how about that? So if you have a sensitive information on a laptop and you say, you know what, I'm going to put a control in place. What control? I'm going to create an account on the laptop. So I'm going to create two accounts. Maybe it's your laptop, and maybe that laptop is, maybe you are a student, and then maybe two other friends of yours, they come around and use that laptop as well. And you ask yourself, this is my personal laptop, and I have some personal information here. I don't want the confidentiality of this information to be breached. I don't want anybody to see this personal information of mine. Okay, I'm going to implement a control. What's the control? I'm going to create an account, visitor's account and my personal account, and I'm going to put a password. That's a control. But the truth is, somebody can still break into your own into your account on that password. So you can say, okay, now that I've implemented it, I've created a password, I'm going to encrypt the data. I'm going to encrypt the data. To encrypt the data means you're going to change that data into a form that is not readable by humans. Okay, so even if somebody breaks your password, somebody guessed your password, brute force. That's what we call the brute force attack. Somebody did something and then they gain access to your laptop. So even if they have the brute force, they've attacked your laptop, they gain access to that folder, but on getting there, they found out that the data has been encrypted. So that's defense in depth. So when you're looking at all the controls in ISO 27001, you're looking at all the controls in Annex A. Just bear in mind that whatever risk you want to treat, you're not just going to apply one control. Minimum, you're going to apply two. It depends on the sensitivity on the information. Very, 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 very sensitive, business sensitive information. It's not going to be two, maybe three or four. Okay, so information security control are never only technical or IT related. It's a combination of different types of control. E.g., documenting a procedure is an organizational control, whilst implementing encryption is an IT technical control. So as you can see, information security control is never just about IT. It's not only IT related. I showed you, in our first class, I showed you the picture of this guy, Edward Snowden, that contractor that was working for NSA, that contractor that stole confidential classified information that belongs to the US government. This guy stole it and then he passed it on to WikiLeaks, and of course WikiLeaks posted it, they published it on the internet. Now you cannot tell me that NSA does not have enough technical controls. These guys, their own servers, they are specialized servers. The computers they use, they are not bought. The servers they use, they are not bought off the shelf. They are the things they use in those kind of places. Their computers, their servers, everything, all their network devices, everything they use, they are specially made for them. They are not the things you will find in the marketplace. You won't find any of their devices in the market. You won't find it on the shelves. So, but despite that, somebody still stole information. So that tells you that information security is more than technical. So you don't tell me, oh, I'm a Cisco engineer, I'm a certified blah 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 blah. That doesn't make you an information security expert. That doesn't make you. So that's why information security is not all about technical. Remember, it's about the people, the process, and the technology they interact with. If it's about the people, the process, and the technology we are interacting with. So this one says an administrative control when you document a procedure, and then of course while you're implementing encryption, that is a technical control on its own. So IT security versus information security. IT security versus information security. Information security is a wider concept than IT security because it includes the protection of different types of information and not only the information stored or transmitted over IT network. Okay, when you look at technology savvy people, all these IT techie guys, they're always talking about tech, and the way they were talking about when they're talking about the jargons and all those things, and you're wondering, will I ever know these things? Oh, I'm not a computer person, I don't have time for all of this. I'm happy to let you know that information security is bigger than IT security. It is bigger because IT security is as actually part of information security. And the good thing is, you see, by the time we get to the controls, by the time we start talking about the controls in Annex A, you are not the one to implement, but you are the one to tell them what they need to do. You are the one to tell them what they need to do. Okay. There was an incident that happened in my workplace. So somebody was about to share. I work in an insurance industry. So, one of the guys was about to share an information with a third party. So he sent me an email to say, "Well, I'm about to share. I've been asked to check with you guys, information security guys, if it's okay to share this data with that third party." So I asked him, "So what's the classification of the data you want to share?" We're going to get that. I'm going to show you data classification. We're going to get there. So I said, "What's the classification of that data you're going to share?" He said, "Well, it is confidential." He said, "Okay, if it is confidential." So I said to him, "If it is confidential, so how do you intend to send this information to that third party?" He said, "Well, I'm just going to attach it to my email and I'm going to send it to him. We've been doing that for years anyway. There has never been problem. So I'm just running it through you just to fulfill all righteousness." So, but I mean, these guys they've been working with us for years. They've been doing business with us. There hasn't been any problem. So I send them this data, and then we just get on with the business. So I said to him, "Well, this is a confidential information." I said, "So you want to share a confidential information over the internet?" I said, "So if somebody intercept that information as you're sending it over the internet, what impact will that have on our organization?" I said, "What impact will that have if somebody intercept that information and get to know what the content of that document you are sending is? What impact will it have on our organization?" He said, we might lose the business because we have some information there that is just for us." I said, "Okay, so that means there's going to be a severe impact if the confidentiality of that information is breached." I said, "So therefore, you cannot send that information over the internet. It has to be encrypted. That information, your email has to be encrypted so that if anybody intercepts that information while it's going through the internet, at least it becomes useless to that person." So I said to him, "So raise a ticket with the service desk and ask them, to encrypt your email by default. So anytime you want to send that information, so that when you send the email by default, it is encrypted." So I'm not the one to encrypt. I'm not doing anything. I'm just telling them what they need to do. And that's your job. I'm not the one. I don't know how to encrypt. Encryption technology, I don't know it, but I know what it stands for. I know what it does. So I will simply tell them, this is what you need to do. If they don't have anybody within the organization that will help them to encrypt, then they need to hire maybe an engineer to come and do it. So don't try to know it all. Okay. So don't try to say, "Oh, I'm not a technology savvy person, I'm not an IT person." You just know the why. Just know the why they need to do it. You don't have to know the how. You don't need to know how to encrypt the data, but you need to know the why. Why do they need to encrypt it? You need to tell them. You need to give them a business justification. Okay, so that is why information security is bigger than IT security. I hope that, as for those of you that are still doubting, "Oh, I'm not an IT person. Will I be able to do this?" So this is about information security, and it's not just data that is transmitted over a network. It's also about data in a paper form, in any form whatsoever. Okay. So implementing ISO 27001, I think we're getting close to the end of the class. Implementing ISO 27001 requirement. Now, in order for an organization to comply with ISO 27001, they have to implement all the requirements from clause 4 to 10. The standard is best implemented and maintained through a method called PDCA. If you have not come across this, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a standard that is this method is used in different industries. This method can be used in different industries, and this is the method we are going to be using as well. So they are in, if you look at your, if you take your ISO 27001 from page 1 to page from page 1 to page 9, from page 1 to page 9, these are the requirements. These are the requirements. So in order for you to comply with ISO 27001, you need to implement this requirement. So when an assessor comes to your organization to check you out, if you are applying for, if your organization is applying for ISO 27001 certificate, oh, you say we're applying for it, we need that certificate. So when an assessor, when you contact BSI, the British Standard of Institution, and then they send an assessor to your organization, these are the things he's going to be checking for. So he wants to check if you have implemented all the requirements in clause 4 to 10. He wants to check that. Okay, so if you look at page 1 to 9, so these are all the requirements. After this class, you can just take your time to read these requirements. Okay, we're going to go through it one after the other actually. So take your time to read this requirement. These are the requirements that you need to implement. These requirements need to implement. And how do you do that? We can use this method, the plan, do, check, and act method. Okay, the plan is what to achieve and how to do it. That's where you identify your problems. That's when you identify your problems. Okay, that's the part where you're going to do the planning, where you're going to be doing the risk assessment. Okay, so what to achieve and how to do it. You have not started doing it, you are still planning it. Okay, so when you identify the problem, when you identify what you want to achieve, okay, you have been brought in as a consultant to that charity organization I showed you, and then they said to you, well, this is our customer service operations, so the scope is very small, so we want to achieve them, we want to comply with ISO 27001, and we want to apply for that certificate at the end. So you are going to document everything they want to achieve, and then how are we going to do what we want to achieve? How do we get there? Oh, we want to get to, this is where we are, but we want to get over there. But how do we get there? Okay, the do phase is the implementing what you have planned for in the previous phase. The do phase is implementing what you have planned for in the previous phase. So what you planned for in the previous phase, in the plan phase, that's what you need to do in the do phase. Okay, the check is the confirming if things went as planned and if the desired objectives were achieved. Remember, you set an objective in the plan phase. Okay, in the do phase, you implement what you planned for. In the check phase, you are now checking to see if what you planned for was achieved in the check phase. And then in the closing stage is where you close the gap. So if you are checking if you are checking what you planned for, if you are checking if it was achieved, if it wasn't achieved, and then in the act phase you close the gap. So if there is something left undone, that's in the act phase. That's what you're going to be doing in the act phase. So the act phase is about closing the gap between the plan phase and the check phase. Closing the gap between the plan phase and the check phase. So remember, the plan phase is where you define what you want to achieve. Okay, you've just been taken on board as a consultant to come and help them with implementation of ISO 27001. By the way, ISO 27001 is implemented as a project. It's a project on its own. It is a project on its own. So there could be a project manager, there could be an information security analyst, there could be one other supporting PMO who is supporting you. Okay, so it's going to be done because it has a start and a end date. So it's a project. It's not something that is going to be going on forever, because your objective, the end goal of that project, is for that organization to be certified, for that organization to apply for certification and say, well, we have applied for ISO 2001 and now we have been certified. So we can boast around, we can put it on our badge, we can put it on our website that we have been, we have ISO 27001. But when I get to the benefit of ISO 27001, I will give you more information on that. So you plan what you want to achieve, you do it. When you do what you plan, you check if what you plan has been done, and then in the act phase, if there's anything left undone, if there's any gap, you close it in the act phase. So I'm going to be showing you how this relates. I'll give you, I think the next slide will give us more information. So how does this PDCA applies to ISMS implementation? How does this PDCA, the Plan Do Check Act, that PDCA stands for Plan Do Check Act, how does it apply to ISMS implementation? Understanding the context of the organization, that's the plan phase. Defining the ISMS scope, planning the information security policy, conducting risk assessment, and the risk assessment plan. The first one there is understanding the context of the organization. If we're going to use our example, our organization is a charity organization. So that's the context. Oh, this is a charity organization. Perhaps there's a parent organization that they are reporting to, because that organization I showed you is just a customer operations center. Perhaps they have a parent company somewhere. Okay, you know, some of these charity organizations, sometimes they come together and they form one big massive organization. So you need to understand the context of the organization. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the interested parties? What do I need to consider? Does the local authority have interest in this? What regulation are they supposed to be complying with? So you have to document all those things. So that's the plan phase. You define the ISMS scope. The bigger the organization, the more complex is the project. The bigger the organization, the more complex is the project. The organization I showed you, you could see they have just the customer operation center, they have just 3 systems, and then maybe they have about 2 or 3, they have 2 or 3 servers, okay? They have 2 firewalls, you know. So that's, you define the scope, because when you obtain the certificate, in the certificate they are going to write it there. This certificate covers the customer operations only. So when you get a certificate for that organization I showed you, it's going to be in the certificate. You're going to say this certificate covers the customer operations. This certificate covers so it doesn't cover the entire organization. It covers the customer service operations. And in multinationals, actually, their implementation is always in segments, because if they want to do everything together, it's going to be too complex. So they rather put it into segments. So they will say, okay, you know what, let's bring in 2 or 3 information security professionals. So one person can handle this segment. This segment is for HR and finance. That other segment is for legal and sales. So they will divide it somehow, so that to make the scope smaller, so that it will be in a manageable, place. So you define the scope. So when you get into the organization, you need to know the scope. What is the scope? What are we covering? From where to where? Am I covering this branch alone? Do you have other branches and other places that needs to be covered? You need to document all of that. And then you plan the information security policy. Remember all the policies you ever need, all the controls you ever need. 99% of them is in Annex A of ISO 27001. 99% of them is in Annex A of ISO 27001. For instance, you could see, even by mere inspection of that diagram I showed you, somebody is collecting personal data on the street. It takes that personal data. When she finishes at work, okay, she gets on a red bus, and then she goes to their office, and then sometimes there's a possibility she forgets her bag on the red bus, and that bag she forgot on the red bus, and then that contains personal identifiable information. I'm not sure if anybody heard the news about 1 week ago when they found a USB drive on the street, a USB drive that contains security information about Heathrow. Did anybody hear that news? Can anybody tell me more about that? Did anybody hear that news? A USB drive that was found very close on the street, and it contains security information. Okay, Wale, okay, you heard about it. So you can imagine that. So you can see you are beginning to see the risk. Okay, yeah. So you are beginning to see that's the risk there. So you can write a policy and say no one is allowed to take such thing out of the premises without due process. So if you are going to be taking anything out of this premises, you have to follow this process. So you can write a policy. Okay, so you can see these things they are real. They are not okay. Somebody, you can imagine, very, very sensitive information, and they just found it. They found the USB drive on the street. Security related information. They found it on the street. And you will have thought Heathrow is a big organization. How would they have done that? Heathrow, their turnover is billions of pounds. Oh, how could that have happened? So that tells you that information security is not just about technology. It's about how the people and the process interact with the technology. Okay, so you plan information security policy. You will be conducting risk assessment. You will be conducting risk assessment. We're going to go into risk assessment. I'm going to show you guys. We're going to be using ISO 31000. That's another framework for risk assessment. And then we're going to be using ISO 27005, which is the risk assessment for information security itself. Okay. So, sorry about that. Yep. So this is just the planning phase. This is just the planning phase. We're trying to see how the plan, do, check, and act, how it applies to ISMS implementation. So this is the planning phase. So we have not started doing anything. We have not started. It's your first week. It's your first 2 weeks at work. So you are still documenting things. You are still trying to understand what this organization is. Okay, you are trying to understand. You are still asking questions. So show me your. So one of the ways we can do. One of the ways I normally do it. I say, okay, what is the process in this organization? What do they sell? What's the product? What are they doing? How did they make their money here? What service are you providing? So if you follow those process from one person to the other, you begin to see. So the person will tell you, well, when I get to work in the morning, I go online, I will check all the orders that we have received over the internet. So I pick those orders one after the other, I validate them. So once I validate them, I send it to our sales team. So I will ask them, so okay, where is the sales team? Oh, the sales team, they sit upstairs. Okay, the sales team, where do you receive information from those people? You say, yes, we receive information from them. So what did you do with it? Oh yeah, we will process the order, and then we will send it to our courier, who will go and deliver the order. So where do you store the information you are processing? Where do you store it? Oh, we store it in that server. So that's how you begin to identify their assets. Okay, so as you are following their process, you will begin to identify their assets. You will identify the asset, and you are making notes. Okay, these people pick up the order, they process it, they send it to the sales team process it, and then they send it to the courier, and then they tell you that courier is actually a third party. If that courier is a third party, so the courier blah blah blah. So you are going to follow the process through. You see, okay, now you can see from end to end. So you identify the assets. Okay, so you have not started. You're just trying to do risk assessment here. I'm going to show you. We're going to go into risk assessment fully, but I'm just giving you an overview. Okay, so that is the plan phase. You are just planning it. Okay, you have not started at all. You are just planning it. Okay, then the implementation of risk treatment plan. So when you have finished your risk assessment, you are going to have the output is a risk assessment plan. I'm going to show you all of that as well. Okay, so the output of your risk assessment is a risk treatment plan. So the risk treatment plan is okay for those of you that are moving, that are maybe they told you that okay, once we finish processing and then we send it to that courier, blah blah blah, and then you say, okay, how do you send it to the courier? What happened? Or sometimes they tell you, the courier man will come here and pick up the orders, or you send it by email or whatever. Okay, so depending, so if you look at it, okay, what the things you are sending, their personal information. It contains the email address of people. It contains their maybe their date of birth, maybe their their address, their postcode, and all those things. So you are going to have a plan and say, well, from now on, it's not safe for you to. I've looked at your process and I can see where the risk lies here. So based on the controls in Annex A, which you have looked at, okay, so you're going to be coming up and say, okay, this is what they need to do, and this is what they need to do. Okay, you, in most instances, when you tell them, especially when it comes to technical control, you are not the one to implement, but you are the one to tell them what they need to do and why they need to do it. So you just need to know the why. You need to know the why, and that's why you need to know the law. You need to know the regulation. You need to know what the law says, because you will have done your due diligence. You know that this organization you're working for, maybe it's a charity organization, maybe it's in the education sector, it's in the health sector. You will have looked at the regulations that regulate that industry. So you know what the law says. So you will be telling them the why. So when you tell them you need to do this, and they will ask you, so why do we need to do that? This is how we have been doing it for ages and we don't have a problem. And then you will tell them, well, you'll be breaking the law if you continue to do it that way, but you need to do it this way. Okay, so when you tell them the why, they will reason with you, because that's why you are there as an information security officer. That's why you are there to safeguard them. Okay, so that's the output of that risk assessment plan is what you are going to do in the do phase. So that's where you will implement the risk treatment. The risk treatment could just be writing a policy. The risk treatment could be, oh, okay, we need to write a procedure. Maybe you have observed inconsistency in the way they process, they process their orders, or maybe their business, you saw one of their business process, there is a kind of inconsistency. You say, okay, wait a minute, we need to write a procedure here. So what's the best way of doing this? We need to write a procedure. So when you receive the order, you log into that portal, you record it. Once you record it, you send an email to that guy. Once that guy receives it, that guy enters into an entry. That's a procedure. So you are telling them step by step that they need to follow. Okay, so that's a procedure, that's a control there. So that's what you'll be doing in the do phase. So that's where the various controls and processes in order to achieve information security objective. So the reason why you are putting those controls in place, you are implementing the risk treatment plan, is because you want to achieve information security objectives. Remember what our objectives are? The objectives, remember our goals, the information security goals. Can anyone remind me? What are the information security goals? What are the goals? Can anyone remind me? Are you guys there? Hello? Someone talk to me. Unmute yourself and talk to me. Oh, CIA, very, very good. Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much. Yeah, CIA, yeah. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, then the check phase conducts regular monitoring and measurement, internal audits and management reviews. So the check is where you check what you plan to do, in what you plan for in the plan phase. You check if it has been done. The check phase, what you planned for in the plan phase, you check if it has been done. And if it hasn't been done, maybe there is a gap somewhere, then you act, you implement corrective actions and improvement initiatives. Okay, so the plan phase is covered in clause 4 to 7. Clause 8 is the do phase, clause 9 is the check phase, and clause 10 is the act phase. So if you look at your from page 1, from clause 4 to clause 7 of the standard, it talks about, that's the plan phase. Clause 4, if you look at clause 4 now in page 1, it says understanding the organization and its context. You can see 4.1 there. It says understanding the organization and its context. So if you look at that clause 4 to clause 7, it's all about plan phase. And clause 8 is the do phase. Clause 8 is the do phase. Clause 8 talks about the information security risk assessment, information security risk treatment. That's the do phase. And clause 9 is the check phase. Clause 9 is the check phase. Clause 9 in page 8. In page 8, internal audit. When we get to audit, I'll be showing you how to audit, because after we have implemented ISO 27001, we have what we call auditing. You can also audit. You can audit the system and check, because auditing is, you're going to have an audit criteria. But I'll show you all of this, all these things, because our ISO 27001 becomes our criteria. We can audit it, okay? So clause 9 is the internal audit. So that internal audit is a way of checking. We want to check if what we planned for in the plan phase, we want to check if it has been done. Okay, we want to check if the security objectives are being achieved. So that's the check phase. And then of course the clause 10 is the improvement. Page 9 of your ISO 27001, that number 10 there says improvement. So that's where you're going to be plugging the improvements, where you're going to be plugging the gaps. If there's any gaps, if there's anything undone that you have not yet done. So that's where you're going to be implementing corrective actions. I believe it is straightforward. I hope you guys understand the plan, do, check, act as it applies to ISMS implementation. Also, just remember that clause 4 to 7 is the plan phase, clause 8 is the do phase, clause 9 is the check phase, and clause 10 is the act phase. You do not need to cram anything here. Nobody's going to ask you, so tell me what's in clause 4, tell me what's in clause 5. Nobody's going to ask you that. This document is a reference document which you are expected to make reference to. You cannot work without it. Even if you're a consultant with 10, 15 years experience, you are still going to be referring to this document. Okay, so nobody expects you to memorize it, but you need to understand the structure. You need to understand what it stands for. I'm sure before now, if you have taken your time to read the document when I sent it to you guys, perhaps when you were reading it, it doesn't make sense to you. But now, after this class, it should start making sense to you. It should start making sense to you. And if it still doesn't make any sense to you, go back to this video, make notes. It helps. When you make notes, it helps. Go online, go on YouTube. go on YouTube. There are thousands of videos there. So you can still, if for instance, if you go on YouTube and you just type plan, do, check, act, you will see various videos, various scenarios. So that will drive home the point. You will see how it happens. Okay, how these things, you will see how it applies in the workplace. So this is the list of mandatory documents and records prescribed by ISO 27001. ISMS consists of policies, procedures, and documents. So I told you it's about policies, procedures, and documents. It describes the security rules in an organization. However, not all policies and procedure is required to be documented, but how do you know which one to document? Watch out for the word shall. Now, if you look at this documentation I sent you, this is ISO 27001. This is the there's another one called ISO 27000, but that one is just guidance. Now, what makes this a standard is because they are using the word shall. Shall. Okay, let me look for one. Okay, just open your document to page page 1. Just open to page 1 and look at understanding the organization and its context. 4.1. I'm looking at page 1 here. 4.1, page 1. You can see the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome. The word shall is what I want to point out to you there. Throughout this document, that's how they use the word shall. So when they use the word shall, they are not using the word should. Because if they had used the word should, you could interpret it and say, well, if it is should, I can decide to do it and I might not do it. But it's shall. That means it is compulsory. So if you don't do it, you are not going to get the certificate. You're not going to get certified. You are not going to be complying with ISO 27001. So when the word shall there, that's what makes it mandatory. So when it says shall, the organization shall retain, e.g., the result of the risk assessment, then this is a mandatory document that needs to be documented. So when you are going through each of these clauses, watch out for that word shall. Whenever you see the word shall, so they are telling you that this clause that you are reading, by the time you want to implement it, you need to document it. Okay, so that means you need to document it. Okay, they need a document. That's why, for instance, the result of the risk assessment it must be documented. When you do a risk assessment, the result of your risk assessment, it has to be documented because it is requested. So this is the list of mandatory documents and records in ISO 27001. So if you are hired as a consultant for an organization to help them with their ISO 27001 implementation project, when you finish implementing it for them, when the assessor comes, when an external assessor comes, an assessor is an independent person coming from BSI, British Standard of Institutions. When the assessor comes to your organization to assess your organization, if they can be awarded this certificate, these are the documents he's going to request for. So when the assessor comes, he's going to ask you, so what is the scope of your ISMS? Is that documented? Where is it documented? Oh yeah, the scope of our ISMS, we are just focusing on the business operations, on the customer operations center. Yeah, this is where we documented it. Okay, these are the documents they want to see. So they want to see your information security policy and objective. They want to see your risk assessment and the treatment methodology. They want to see your statement of applicability. That's the list of controls that you have, the list of controls that you chose from Annex A. There are 114 controls there. By the time you finish your own risk treatment plan, perhaps you use just 60 controls. So the statement of applicability will contain all those controls and why you choose them. So you're not just going to choose them for choosing sake. You must give us the reason why you choose that control. Why did you say they must be encrypting? Oh, because they are transmitting confidential information across the internet. That's a reason. That's a justification. Where is your risk treatment plan? Where is your risk treatment report? Okay, and part of the requirement is that there must be a record of training skills, experience, and qualification. Most organizations will encourage their employees to take on. They will tell you, oh, do you want to write that exam? Oh yes, we can pay for you. They will encourage you. Most organizations, they have the policy. They will tell you, if you want to write any exam, if you want to go for any course, come and meet us, we're going to pay for it. They know what they're doing because it's part of their requirement. When they want to renew their certification, the assessor is going to ask for the record.
It's going to say, okay, how do I know that the guys that you have in your IT, all those guys sitting down in the help desk, how do I know that they are qualified? How do I know that they have the experience to? How do I know that they have the skill set to do the job? So all of that is going to be in records. Monitoring and measurement of results. You're not just going to implement ISO 27001 and walk away. You have to keep, the PDCA is a cycle. Remember that PDCA cycle I showed you earlier on? It's a cycle because it's a continuous thing. You have to keep monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of your information security. You have to keep measuring. It's a continuous thing. Internal audit program. You could have, in large organization, there's always a program. The internal auditors, they work all year round. Okay, so they will have a program to say, okay, by month 4 we are going to audit the HR and the sales. By month 6 we are going to audit this and the legal and this. So they will have a program for their auditing. So the assessor would like to see that program. Okay, the result of the internal audit. So when you did the last audit you did, can you show us the results? The result of the management review, because management will always get reports every month concerning the effectiveness of ISMS. So they want to see the review. Then the result of corrective actions. Okay, maybe when you did your internal audit, you found some gaps. You realized that that policy was not made available. You realized that there wasn't a process in place. So then they put some corrective actions in place and say, okay, these are the corrective actions. These are the things we need to do. So they want to see the result of those corrective actions. So these are the list of all. This is the list of mandatory documents and records in ISO 20001. So if you are involved in an ISO 27001 implementation project, these are your end goals. This is where you want to, by the time you finish your plan, do, check, act cycle, you will have obtained all of this information. Okay, so I hope that is clear enough. So what are the benefits of ISO 27001? We've been talking about ISO 27001. What is the benefit? Why do I have to do it? Remember I said ISO 27001 is not a regulatory standard. It's an industry standard. So compliance is not actually mandatory. But the truth is, ISO 27001 is the foundation of security. It is the foundation. It helps to improve information security of your organization. It helps to improve the information security of your organization. It provides the organization with a marketing edge. Any supplier in my place of work, if a supplier is saying, because we work with a lot of cover holders, people that does insurance and all those things. So, if anybody is bidding for a work, for instance, you can't even bid for a contract from the British government. Say you are bidding for an IT, you are bidding for an IT job from the British government, and you don't have ISO 27001. You can't bid for it, because they will have put it as part of their condition that your organization, your company needs to have a recent certificate, that is in date. You can't just go and bring something that you obtained 4 or 5 years ago. No, it has to be in date. Okay, so it could give your organization a marketing edge. So when you are bidding for contract, you can say it loud and say, well, we have this ISO certification, because what you are trying to tell them is that, look, we take information security serious. We take it serious in our organization, and that's why we have that certificate. We take it serious. We don't joke with risk in our organization, and that's why we have that. So that will give your organization an edge. So it can give you a marketing edge. Okay, it lowers the expenses that could be caused by incidents. The truth is, when it comes to implementing risk treatment plans, when it comes to doing information security and all of those, anything that has to do with security in the workplace, they consider it as it's not something that brings returns. It's not something. It's like it's like an added cost for organization to implement security. So you can't say this is a return on investment. Oh, because we spent 150,000 for us to get our certification in implementing and all of those things. So you can't say, well, this is a return. Well, we've invested 150,000 in information security, and then that is a return. There's no return. But what happens is, when you invest that kind of money in information security, that prevents incidents. That prevents all sorts of incidents from happening. That helps you to comply with the law. So would you rather spend £20,000 to implement ISO 27001 in your organization, or choose not to implement it, and then there is an incident where there was a data breach, and then your organization gets fined get fined heavily. When we get to Data Protection Act, I'm going to be showing you a spreadsheet, and you're going to see some information that I obtained from the Information Commissioner's Office, where you will see all the fines that they fine this organization. A lot of things are going on out there. You know, when you get fined £200,000, you get fined £400,000 for breach, for data breach. Okay, so you rather spend 20K to implement it rather than to get fined 200,000. So it lowers the expenses that could be caused by an incident. Okay, the standard helps to organize your business by defining responsibilities and procedures. When we start talking about all the clauses tomorrow, you're going to see those responsibilities and those procedures. That's why in every one thing that ISO 20001 requested demands for is that there must be a C-level, a corporate level officer who is going to be in charge of security, and that's why you have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, who is in charge of security in organization, who has been given the responsibility of information security. So that's what defining responsibility is referring to there. The standard provides a framework that helps in complying with relevant regulations regarding data protection and privacy laws. Like I told you, ISO 27001 is the foundation. It is the foundation. So if you're going to be working in the GDPR space, maybe when you get there, you're going to be working as a business analyst in a GDPR project, and then you ask them questions. So do you already have ISO 27001 certification in this organization? They say, oh yes, we are certified. We have the certificate. Okay, fine. That means you have a good starting point. Okay, but if they don't have it at all, oh, you're starting from the scratch. So if there's any other law you want to comply with, it is easy for you to do. Maybe you want to comply with PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. Once you have ISO 27001 out of the way, it is easy for you to comply with other relevant laws, because that means the foundation has been sorted. That means the basic has been sorted. Okay, so it will be very easy for you to comply with other relevant laws. But without that being sorted, and you want to comply with those other laws, you will just end up wasting money. You will end up wasting money. It's going to be futile effort. You need to start from the foundation. Okay, so that's why I'm taking my time to explain to you what this framework is all about, and that's why we're going to be getting our hands dirty regarding that picture I showed you, that organization I showed you. We will attempt to carry out a risk assessment, and we're going to try and document as much as possible. We will attempt to write as much policies as possible, because when you go out there, one of the questions they will ask you, have you ever written an information security policy? Oh yes, I have one. I have done one, because you have actually done one. Okay, so I think I will have to stop there. Let me stop there because of our time, and I don't want to give you too much of information. I need to let you go away so that you can think about everything we have said. So that brings us to the end of this class. So tomorrow, hopefully, I'm going to make it very. Now that everything we've done today is just the foundation. You can see I've not even touched any of the clauses yet, and neither have I touched. I haven't even touched the Annex A side of it as well. But I have been able to lay the foundation. So tomorrow we're just going to build on it. So we're going to continue with this framework tomorrow. So tomorrow we're gonna talk about all the clauses. I'll just talk through them, what it means, and then we'll talk about the sections and the controls as well. And then if we can finish that tomorrow, that would be brilliant. And then that means on Friday we'll just go straight into risk management and auditing. Yep. So that brings us to the end of this class. I hope you guys have learned one or two things. So you can unmute yourself now and ask questions, please. You can unmute yourself and ask questions, please. Hello? Are you guys there? Okwe, do you have a question? No, you don't have a question. Okay, that means you understood everything I've been saying. You're fine with everything.
You said that. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Okwe.
You said ISO 27001 is usually a project on its own,
Yeah.
which makes perfect sense. But I was just wondering, so if a company is implementing just other projects, so it's not a dedicated. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this properly. So let's just say you're implementing a project, just any project. Let's say you're implementing a new system.
Okay.
Am I right in assuming that within that project, a portion of it could be, or they could assign someone just to make sure that that new system complies with ISO 27000? So it's not an ISO 27000 project in itself,
Yeah.
but a project that, maybe I don't know if it's due
Yeah, it makes sense.
diligence.
That's actually a very, very good question. Now, this is how it happens in the workplace. Whenever they want to initiate a change, maybe there's going to be they want to add on a new server, they want to move a server somewhere, they want to move an application, any project, any IT project whatsoever. If they have, there's what we call the business requirements definition, the BRD. So they could document it and say, this is what we want to do. And if it's a project that will involve them, maybe moving things around, change of infrastructure, they will usually have an HLD, high level design, and a low level design. So the high level design will show, this is where the server is, but we're going to procure new servers. We're going to have another server there. We put a firewall there. We do this. So you will just see the design will show what they want to do. So what happens is they will now tell you, they will tell the network architect to run it through the information security guys. So they will send it to you and say, this is what we want to do. So can you sign this off? So when you look at what they want to do, you look at, okay, what do you want to do? You want to move this server, you want to move it there. So you are going to be looking at it from information security point of view. Okay, so at that point in time, you are not implementing it's not that you are implementing ISO 27001 project, but they just want to run it through you as an information security expert. Okay, so you will just tell them, I've seen what you want to do. You want to move that server there. So you're going to be asking them, so if you move that server there, what control do you have in place? What kind of information are you going to be storing in that server? We're going to be storing card holder details, the names and personal information, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to be asking, so who are the people that will have access to that server? This person will have access, that person will have access. And then you will ask them, that person that will have access, has it been trained on how to handle personal data? You are concerned with the security of the information. Okay, so you are concerned with the security of the server itself. Okay, so they will run it through you. So you will look at it from information security point of view. If you are fine, if you look at it and say, well, I've looked at what they want to do, okay, there's no problem. You sign it off. Oh, fine. They'll just come back and say, well, we've run it through the information security guys, and they've signed it off, so we can continue with our project. Then that's you hands off. You don't have anything to do with them again. You've given them the green light. Otherwise, you will tell them, oh, well, you cannot do that. You have to do this. You will tell them what they need to do based on your risk assessment. You will tell them, well, that place you want to move that server to, that maybe they are moving, maybe part of the project is that they're going to be moving some data, maybe an application, they're moving into a data center, blah, blah, blah. You could tell them, well, that data center you're moving that information to, that's a public facing website. The public have access to all the data in that place. And hacker can hack into that environment and then get access into this confidential information. So you cannot have that data there. If you want to have that data there, then you have to encrypt it at rest. So if you want to make sure, if you insist that you want the data in that particular place, then you need to encrypt it. So they will go away and say, well, information security said we have to encrypt the data. They say we can't keep the data there. Okay, so you will tell them what they need to do. That's your job. So you can say you are not involved with them, helping them to do it, but you are risk assessing them. That's the work of an IT security analyst. Okay, that's an IT they call it risk assessment analyst. Okay, so if you look at IT risk analyst, that's the word, IT risk analyst. So they will run it through you. You will look at it. Of course, you have your controls. Remember, you have your ISO 27001 handy. So you look at it, you do your risk assessment, and then you tell them what they need to do, and that's it. And then they continue with their project. So if what you told them, if they accept what you've told them, they say, okay, why do we need to do that? Then you tell them the why. This is the reason why you need to do this. They say, oh, okay. So they will go back to their drawing board, and then they will go and implement that control. They will go and incorporate that control you told them. What you told them to do, what you found in Annex A, they will go and incorporate it into their project. And with that, they would have put information security, they would have incorporated information security into that project. And that's what we call, when we get to GDPR, we're going to talk about privacy by design. privacy by design. We'll talk about it when we get to GDPR. I hope that answers your question, Okwe.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Dayo.
Okay. Any other question, please? Any other question? Okay, in the absence, if there's no any other question, that brings us to the end of tonight's class. Thank you for joining in. I hope you guys have learned one or two things. I cannot overemphasize on saying that you need to go back. I'm going to stop the recording very shortly, and once I need to do some conversion, then I can share it with you guys. So please, once the class for today and tomorrow, it will be very, very beneficial for you if you can listen to it during the week, because so that by the time we get to Friday and we're taking new subjects, we're taking new topics, the things will now begin to make sense to you, and you can begin to, join the dots together. So don't just, if you just leave it and you're not attending to it, before you know it, by the time we get to next week, you won't even know what TIA is again. Okay, so please, I want to enjoin you to please go back and listen and make notes. Listen and make notes. Make notes. Go online, search every spare time that you have. Go online and search. There's no amount of information I can give you. You need to learn this thing yourself in order for you to sink. You need to learn this thing yourself. So that's why you need to spread. You need to spread your tentacles. Go to different sources. Get information. All the things we have talked about. Go and search for more information. Research about it. Write them down. Let it make sense to you. Let it sink. Okay. So and then before you know it, with hard work, before you know it, you're already a professional. Okay. So that's it. I'm gonna send the invite for tomorrow's meeting. I will send it out maybe tomorrow. I'll send it out tonight. I'm going to send the invite for tomorrow's meeting. The invite, I'm going to send it out tonight. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good night. Bye.